So I will stop jabbering, and in a minute we'll let Renee start jabbering. And as I said, Renee has been diving with us, and I do remember, and I looked it up and now I don't remember, but I want to say it was like 2004. We went to the underwater park. When did we go to the underwater park? It'll point and shoot camera.
It was 2013 or 14.
All right, 2013 or 14. I was with her twin sister in 2004. We had gotten married and had a couple of kids, actually. But she really did start out with a point and shoot camera and just got really into it, and has to say that she has improved slightly since then would be a massive understatement. And she is now a professional photographer. It's sort of like those things with the old Maui and Patty schools. In 6 weeks, you can become a world-renowned instructor. But I think it took her a little longer than 6 weeks, but she probably got a little bit better resume now, including named Photographer of the Year for 2021. And so she is going to share not all of her tips, because she wants to be Photographer of the Year 2022 as well. So God forbid any of you beat her out. But please welcome Renee Capozzola, which is always I always have to look how to spell it to make sure I spell it right. And
sound.
She will just go ahead and take care of everything.
Sound.
Vic, I'm going to mute you. There we go. Now, it's interesting. Vic usually mutes himself and sends me notes, so not a problem. Anyhow, Renee, you have the floor. You have the Zoom.
All right. Well, thank you so much for that lovely introduction, Ken. Thank you so much for having me here tonight. And I'm excited to chat about my very favorite topic, which of course is underwater photography. And I'm also looking forward to sharing some of the stories of some of my shots, as well as some photography tips. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And we tried this out ahead of time and everything was good. So hopefully...
No guarantee. Past performance is not a guarantee. By the way, I will mention that Renee is also by day a school teacher. So just to be clear, there will be a written test afterwards, and she's not grading on the curve. So pay attention.
All right. See, I already messed up, and I wasn't expecting it to,
I covered for you.
Okay.
There we go.
All right. So everybody you can see the title slide.
Yeah, okay. All good.
All right, so first image that I wanted to share with you all is one of my favorite images. I took this back in 2017 in Maui, and it's an over-under. And I think people who are familiar with my work already know how much I love to take these types of shots. I think that you can be really creative with over-unders or split shots, and you can also tell a story by showing, two worlds at the same time. You can show what's above the water and what's below the water. And I also really, really love working with sea turtles. They're one of my very favorite animals to be in the water with. I've spent a lot of time in the Hawaiian Islands where they're protected. And I feel that they're the perfect animal to showcase with a split shot, because they basically breathe air right above the water, and they come onto land to rest, but they pretty much live in the sea. So you can show both worlds of that turtle with this type of shot. And so I certainly didn't start taking pictures like this in the beginning. And in fact, I started out as more of an artist, of a painter. I didn't start diving, and I didn't start taking pictures actually until much later in life. So when I was a child, I actually, I started oil painting when I was 7 years old. I think my mom was trying to get me out of the house after school and find an activity for me to do that I, showed interest in. So she signed me up for oil painting classes. And we also spent, as a family, we spent quite a bit of time in the Hawaiian Islands when I was growing up. And out of all the islands, we spent the most time on Maui. And I think for those of you guys who have been to Maui, especially to the west side to Lahaina, you know that there's a lot of very upscale, very nice art galleries. And back in the 80s, Robert Weiland and Christian Lassen were very prominent, very famous painters, and they were known for painting these over-unders or these split shots. So I was really drawn to these images, when I was even a child, and this was before I started taking photographs, before I was familiar with David Duboulez's work, and before I started scuba diving. So this is actually a picture of a painting that I did when I was 21 years old. So it was quite some time ago. It took me an entire year to paint this. And once I was actually done with this, I actually had to take a break from art for a while because it was such an intense project. But this was really inspired by Weiland and Lassen. And then several years later, when I was about 30, my Aunt Lucille gave me this book. I don't know if you guys have seen this book before. It's an earlier book from David Duboulet. It's called Water, Light, Time. And I know that he has his new book out now, you know, on Over-Unders or Two Worlds. But this book is really remarkable. It has, you know, a lot of his earlier work. And what's truly amazing is that, you know, the images in here were taken on film. And so I learned to take pictures, you know, in the digital age. And I can't imagine, you know, going on a dive and only having 36 exposures, you know, to take. So the split shots that are in this book are just amazing. And just the whole collection was fascinating to me. So I really see this book as, you know, one of sort of my early inspirations for wanting to, you know, eventually try to take these types of photographs. So I didn't start diving until 2004. And when I started diving, I started taking, you know, just some kind of casual pictures. And it wasn't until about 10 years later when I started to take my first split shots. And so I actually went back into my archives, and these were the first two split shots that I ever took. These are the first two frames. And as you can see, they're not very good. So I really had a lot to learn after this particular experience. I took these pictures in Fakarava, which is in the you know, island chain of French Polynesia, a very beautiful place. And there's a lot of shallow coral. So it's a really excellent place to practice your split shots. And what I realized from this experience is that not only did I need a lot of practice, but I also needed to get the proper equipment. If you're interested in taking these types of shots, you mainly need three things. The first thing and the most important thing is going to be your wide angle lens. You can choose a rectilinear or a fisheye. That's, you know, kind of personal preference. And I think that if you're just starting out with taking these types of pictures, the fisheye is probably going to be the easiest. And that's for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's going to give you the most coverage. And then it also does a really excellent job of focusing on the subject that's right in front of the dome port, as well as what's way in the background, you know, to infinity. And of course, that's at a very small, you know, aperture. So the fisheye, I think, is really good in terms of starting out with these types of pictures. And then the third thing that I think is really helpful would be the flash guns. You certainly don't have to have flash, especially if you're shooting midday where the sun is directly overhead and you have a lot of ambient light. But the flash really kind of adds an extra dimension to your image. The underwater portion is always going to be darker than the above water portion. So the flash is going to add that extra brightness, and it's also going to give some pop, you know, to your picture. And you certainly don't need to use them on full power. You can turn them down and use them at 50% or so. And it's just going to add, like I said, that kind of extra pop or light to your shots. So the other thing that I learned is if you can see in both pictures that I'm cutting off either the above water portion, right, in the first picture, or I'm cutting off the underwater portion, right, on the second picture on the right. And so the thing that's really tricky with these shots, and it's something that you just have to get in the water and you have to get experience with it and practice it, is the angle of your dome with the water line. Okay, so you want to be like pretty much perpendicular, and that's why you want to have a calm water line. If it's too wavy, these shots don't really work very well. And you don't want to be angled too up towards the sky or too far down towards the ocean bottom, or you end up cutting off part of your image. So again, that just kind of comes with feel and with practice. Okay, so why did I start taking pictures, and how did I, you know, start taking more sophisticated pictures, you know, like this? So when I first started diving, none of my friends were divers. Nobody in my family was a diver. My husband and I actually started diving together. We were on a trip to Maui, And this was back in 2004. And we were just looking for something different to do. And I actually had, I don't know if you've seen those magazines that say 101 things to do, like in Maui, and they have one for each of the different islands. So I was looking through that magazine and I came across the scuba diving page. And I said to my husband, I said, why don't we try this? And he was kind of like, well, I don't know, it's kind of up to you. And I said, yeah, let's try it. I think it looks fun. And so we did our first dive. We went out with Lahaina divers and we did a dive from a boat. And we saw, this giant turtle, sea turtle. Such an amazing experience that when we came back from that trip, we immediately got certified here in California, in Redondo Beach, actually. And so that was a really, really kind of eye-opening experience for me. And I think that if I had been friends, with divers at a younger age, I definitely would have, started diving earlier. I think that because I didn't have anyone that I knew that actually was a diver, I didn't really know anything about it. And then as soon as I started diving, because no one that I was friends with was a diver, I wanted to take pictures of what I was seeing. And I wanted to share those pictures, with my family and with my friends. So I got a little point and shoot camera. It was just a little Olympus camera in a plastic little housing, probably $300 for the housing and the camera. So no lenses, no flash, none of that fancy stuff. And just started taking pictures. And of course they were terrible at first. And over time, I actually got more interested in the photography itself, in the technical aspect of how to take better pictures. And then I also got more interested in wanting to get published. I wanted to share my images with others. I was hoping to get something in a magazine. I was really interested in writing some stories, especially because of being a biology teacher. And I also wanted to promote the ocean conservation, especially because I had seen a lot of sort of positive, and negative things with all of the travels that I had done in various areas of the world and the state of the reefs that I had come across. So I didn't really have any connections, though. I didn't have a name for myself. I didn't have a resume, so to speak. So the photo contests were actually how I got my name out there and how I initially, started getting published, with the magazines. And this is where actually Ken comes into the story because the first, I'm going to tell the story again.
Okay.
Yeah. So the first contest that I entered was you guys probably have heard of it. It's the Blue Water SoCal or Southern California Shootout. And it's like a 3-day event. And it really puts everyone on a level playing field because everybody only has 3 days, right, to get these pictures. And so anyways, I figured, okay, I don't really have a lot of experience with, cold water diving. I don't really have a lot of experience diving in California. I certainly need to practice before I do the shootout because I kind of take everything pretty seriously. So I found out that Ken was having a day trip the week before to the dive park in Catalina, to the marine park. And I thought, okay, this is great. Like, I don't have to go on a boat for 3 days. It's just a 1-day thing. And I can go out there and I can practice with my little camera and I can, see, what kind of shots I can try to get for the shootout. And so we go to the park and I think there was probably only 3 of us in the group. I was super lucky because it was a very small group.
Well, it's because nobody likes me too. So, there's that as well.
Yeah, that's it. And so we did our dive, and I think I probably only did 1 or 2 dives, probably because I got cold or something like that. But I remember specifically underwater that I was trying to shoot something, and I think it was a top snail or some kind of little, animal. And I was, not shooting correctly. And Ken actually took my camera from me and he pointed it up towards the surface and actually showed me underwater, no, this is how you take a picture. You need to get closer to the subject and you need to point upwards. And that was so helpful because I honestly didn't have a clue what I was doing. And then I did the shootout, which was, the next week. And I ended up getting, a couple awards. I think I got a 2nd and a 3rd or whatever it was and won some prizes. And I was really happy about that. That was, again, the first thing that I had ever done. And then I started entering, some international contests and it kind of led from there. But I'm very thankful for Ken for taking me out that day and for showing me some of those tips.
Happy to help.
Thank you. Okay, so this is kind of the main, point of the presentation is I'm going to show you some of my favorite shots and tell you some stories of those shots and give you some tips along the way. And this is pretty much in chronological order. So I'm going to start with this one. This was my first awarded image in an international competition. It's called Honu Heaven. I took this in Maui and I entered this into the Ocean Art photo competition in 2014. And I entered it into the novice DSLR category. It got 4th place. So I was really, really happy about that. And the story of the shot is that, you know, I was basically diving at Black Rock, which is out by the Sheraton in Maui. And, you know, you pretty much know you're going to see a turtle right on the dive. And so I had my settings, you know, dialed in for pretty much with shooting with the sun behind me and not shooting into the sun. And as I was, you know, diving, this is a very shallow dive. It was probably about 20 feet. I saw this turtle, you know, swimming. So I started swimming alongside of it. And all of a sudden, the school of goatfish presented itself on the left-hand side. And I thought, oh, wow, like what a cool shot if I could get the turtle and the fish together. The problem is that I was shooting now into the sun and I hadn't actually, you know, dialed in those settings. And back in 2014, I mean, I would know like what settings to choose right now very quickly, but I would have to like think about it. And then I probably would have missed the shot. And so what I ended up doing is I quickly just changed one setting. I had my f-stop, my aperture on f8, and I pushed it up to f16 because of shooting into the sun and not wanting to overexpose, right, the whole scene. And I was lucky because I was able to get this picture, even though I didn't have, you know, the ideal settings. And then with this picture, what's really interesting is I think that this was kind of the image that sort of instigated getting published with the magazines, because when this competition, you know, released the results, like I said, I only got a 4th place. So that definitely wasn't going to like do very much for me in terms of, you know, trying to, you know, get something published in a magazine or something like that. But what happened shortly thereafter is that Scuba Diving Magazine published an online article where they chose about 10 to 12 images from the competition. So there were like, you know, 50 or 60 or so images that were awarded in total from all of the categories. And then they chose about a dozen of those to be in an online, to feature in an online article for the magazine. And they chose my image as one of those, you know, those 12 images. So when I saw that, I thought, okay, this is an opportunity for me to try to get in touch with someone from the magazine and see if I can start working with them or if they will, you know, consider looking at some of my images for publication. So I didn't really know anyone at the magazine. So what I did is I looked up all of the, you know, editors and I found their emails and I basically sent out some emails. And to my surprise, I didn't think anybody would respond because that's what had happened to me in the past. I would send out emails and nobody would respond. The editor-in-chief responded to me and I believe she said something to the effect of like, well, good for you for being assertive and we're going to put you on our call out list, which is essentially, you know, they send it out, you know, every month or every so often when they're looking for images for publication or pitches for stories, you know, that sort of a thing. And so ever since that experience, I've had, you know, several images in that magazine that were published and I've written some stories and, you know, that sort of a thing. So what I learned from this whole experience is that, you know, nobody was going to come to me, that I had to be, you know, assertive and I had to go out of my way in order to, you know, make that connection. And so I'm really glad that I did that. And I think that especially like now it just gets harder and harder with so many good photographers and with social media and with the digital age, it's very competitive. And so to try to, you know, make those connections, I think that you really have to put yourself out there. And, you know, before COVID, I would say like to try to do it in person, you know, either at a dive show or, you know, at these dive meetings that you have, like that sort of a thing as much as you can. And, you know, luckily we have Zoom now, right? Because of COVID, we don't have as many in-person opportunities, but hopefully it'll, you know, go back to having more of those in-person opportunities to meet people and to make those connections. Okay, so The next image that I have is called Sharky Sunset. I took this in Moorea back in September of 2016. And I have kind of a funny story with this image because I actually went to Moorea by myself for basically 3 days. And I went in September because that is the height of the humpback whale season. And my goal was to get in the water and to photograph a whale. And so the first day of the trip, I went out on a boat. I didn't know what I was doing. I wasn't with a photography group. I wasn't on a private boat. I was just on a regular day trip with like a whole group of tourists. None of these tourists were actual like photographers. I'm sure, you know, a bunch of them had GoPros, but it was definitely not a good experience. It was kind of more of a circus-like experience. And so after that experience, I only had 2 days left. And I really wanted to get, you know, some pictures. And so I decided that I would focus on getting some split shots, especially at sunset, and, you know, have to like plan for a whale trip at another time. And so this was a shot that I had kind of thought about. I really wanted to get either a shark or a stingray or something in shallow water paired with the sunset. And so I was able to achieve this shot by using basically a pretty high ISO. I think it was about 500 or 640. And what I did is I exposed for the sunset, and then I used my flash to expose for the shark because obviously the underneath portion would be very dark without the flash. So the flash has turned up pretty high, and the strobes are, you know, basically on either side of my dome port, but pulled down under the water. So they're at about 5 and 7 o'clock, and they're pretty close to the dome port. I'm using a large dome port, so they're about, you know, this far apart. And then I'm also using a very small aperture. So when you're taking split shots, the reason why you want to use a very small aperture, so for example, f/18, f/20, is because you're trying to get what's in front of the dome port, which is in this case, the shark, right, in focus. And then you also want to get what's in the background, right, in focus. Now, in this case, the sunset itself, if you just had like a sky, there wouldn't be that much to focus on, and you would have more room in terms of opening up that aperture. But when you have clouds and you have like little trees in the background or little bushes and things like that, the more detail that you have in the background, the more that you want to close down that aperture to get the background in focus. So this picture, like I said, I took kind of a while ago. I took this 5 years ago. And it actually, out of all the pictures that I've taken over my entire career, this one turned out to be the most published and the most awarded image that I've ever taken. And it was one that was kind of, you know, by chance because the whale trip didn't really work out. So sometimes things kind of, you know, you think that it's not working out, and then there's kind of a silver lining, which this picture definitely was the case.
But see, the whale trip did work out because it got you this shot.
Exactly. That's exactly what I'm saying. And you said it better.
There you go. And Renee,
Right.
quick question. How close are you to the shark, would you say? How
Very
far away?
close.
Yeah,
Very
like a
close,
foot,
like within 3 feet.
Okay.
Yeah. These shots, honestly, if the shark is like, you know, 8 feet away from you, they're
He's
very,
a guppy.
yeah, they don't really light up very well. They look very dark. If you're doing this shot during the daytime and the shark is further away, it'll work because you have so much more ambient light. But when you're doing these sunset shots, they're much harder, and you have, you know, fewer opportunities to shoot because the animal's got to be closer. Okay, so this shot here is actually, you can see some photos in the back, but it's not really a story of one of my pictures. It's more of a story of sort of an experience that I had that I think was very instrumental in terms of me becoming more of a professional with my photography. So in 2016, I decided to team up with a good friend of mine, Ron Watkins, very accomplished photographer, as well as another friend of mine, Jeff Malison, who's a very specialized blackwater photographer who lives in Hawaii. And the World Shootout is a very unique photo competition because they have a team category. It's called the National Team Category. And you can team up a total of 3 photographers. They all have to be from the same country, and you can enter a portfolio of 6 images. So that's 2 per photographer. So the 3 of us got together, and it was very interesting when 3 photographers have to choose 6 pictures and have to agree on it. Okay. So we had about 20 to 30 pictures each that we kind of threw into a Dropbox folder. And then we had all kinds of like calls and like emails and like, you know, conference calls, because we didn't really do Zoom right back then. But we had a lot of discussion going on in terms of which images, not just of mine, but of theirs, were, you know, good images or images that were contest worthy, and which images would be better for a magazine, and then which images were just, you know, not really good because, you know, of the composition or because of the lighting or because of some other reason. So as a newer photographer, teaming up with 2 people who were more experienced, and by doing this team event together, I got a lot of feedback and a lot of constructive, you know, criticism, if you will, in terms of like what were good pictures of mine and why. And I think that was really instrumental in terms of me knowing, you know, where I kind of needed to go from this point. So we entered the competition. We actually won, which was a huge surprise. And so that was also a very rewarding experience. So we were able to get our prize on stage, which was at the boat show in Dusseldorf. It's a big dive show. It's really actually a very exciting dive show because they don't just have a dive hall, they also have a boat hall. And so they have all these like really big yachts and boats, and it's a pretty cool show. So they have it in January, so it's actually very cold as well. Okay, so this next shot that I have, whenever I talk about this shot, it's called Honu Love at Dusk. It's obviously mating turtles. I like to share one of my favorite quotes from the Roman philosopher Seneca, which is, luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity. So in this particular case, I had been out in the water. I had been shooting at sunset, trying to get over-unders or split shots of a turtle. And the sun went down. I was losing light. My husband was up on the cliff saying, let's go. And something inside me said, well, just stay in the water a few minutes longer. And so as I was, you know, swimming around, trying to buy myself, you know, a few more minutes, I noticed a turtle that was swimming underneath me, and it was acting kind of strange. It was swimming kind of erratically and kind of quickly. And then I decided to follow it to see what was going on. And then within a few seconds, it started mating with another turtle underwater. And the 2 turtles came up to the surface and were right in front of me. And basically, I had only a few moments to kind of decide, you know, what kind of picture I was going to take. You know, was I going to take the easier picture, which would be a strictly underwater picture, or was I going to go for the split shot, which would be, you know, the tougher shot, but more of a risk of not, you know, getting anything. And I think because I was already prepared and I was in that sort of split shot mode, and I had been taking those pictures and I kind of had my settings dialed in, I just kind of instinctively went for that split shot. And it was quite a challenging shot because these turtles were pretty violent. They were like spinning around and they were splashing, and water was going everywhere. And then, you know, the water line was wavy and it was cutting off one turtle's head, or it was cutting off the other turtle's head. So I was super, super lucky that I got this frame. And looking back at this experience, I think that, you know, hindsight is always 20/20. But I think that if I had, you know, adjusted my settings a little bit, I could have actually done, you know, a better job. I think that the ISO on this was at 400. It actually says here on the side what the settings were. So the ISO was 400. The f-stop was 16, and the shutter speed was 1/200. So those settings were definitely set for when the sun was still setting. And this was twilight after the sun had already set. But I think that if any of you have been in that moment where there's some sort of behavior that you don't expect, right, that starts happening right in front of you, there's not a lot of time to really adjust settings. And you kind of have to try to capture that behavior and do the best that you can, which is what I did here. Okay, so the next shot I have is kind of a different one here. It's called the Sweepstakes Wreck. And I took this picture in Tobermory. Most people haven't heard of this place. It is in Canada. It's about a 3-hour drive out of Toronto on Lake Huron, where they actually have a marine park with a lot of wrecks. And one of the wrecks is pretty special because it's quite shallow. And that's this wreck called the Sweepstakes Wreck. So I had this sort of vision in my mind. This was a shot that I actually planned ahead of time, where I wanted to get a split shot of a shipwreck. And so when I researched online for shallow shipwrecks that were sort of close by, I came up with this place. And so my family and I went here in July, when it's pretty much the warmest it gets. And we went there for about 5 days, and we went out onto this lake, and I tried to get some split shots of the wreck. And what I had envisioned before I got there was to take a horizontal shot of the ship, half and half, right, above the water, below the water, and to show the ship from bow to stern, so to show the whole thing. And unfortunately, when I got there, the visibility was really poor. And that particular shot that I had in my mind was not going to work. So what I had to do is I had to go with the vertical shot in order to focus on just the front part or the bow of the ship so that I could eliminate the amount of water between the subject and the lens. I had to get really, really close to it. And I had to go with a fisheye. I only had 2 lenses with me. I had a fisheye and I had a 16-35 on a full frame on a Canon on a 5D. And so the problem with the 16-35 is that it wasn't wide enough. I couldn't even get the whole, I had to be so close to the ship because of the poor visibility that I ended up even cutting off the bow of the ship. And so I had to go with the fisheye. And I don't like fisheyes with shipwrecks because they cause a distortion. So afterwards, I was kicking myself that I didn't have a wider lens, and I kind of learned a lesson from this experience. And that, number one, sometimes if you plan a shot, it doesn't kind of turn out that way, and you've got to go with something else. And that you've got to have, a lens selection. If you're thinking about a particular shot, especially a shipwreck, going with the widest possible lens that's rectilinear is going to be your best choice. Okay, so the next shot that I have with you this is the whale trip that turned out. So this was not like the first year in 2016. So in 2017, I went back, and this time I did not go on a day trip with a huge group of tourists. I actually went with a photography group, and it was myself, my good friend Ron Watkins, who had been on the team with me for the World Shootout, and then 2 other photographers. And then of course we had a guide. And so we went for a short period of time. I myself was only there for 3 days, and the rest of the group was there for 5. And on the first day, it was pretty unremarkable. We didn't really have any good encounters in terms of being in the water with the whales. But on the second day, we had this encounter, which to this day is not only the best whale encounter that I've ever had, but is definitely on my, top 5 lists of animal encounters ever. So what happened is that, we were with our guide, and she spotted a mom and a calf that she thought were, calm and resting. And so she went in the water first and made sure that, the whales were resting and not traveling, and that it was okay to get in the water. And then we basically waited on the surface because she said that the whale would come up underneath us and to just stay put. And so as we were waiting, we could see these bubbles coming up, and the bubbles were actually coming from the mom. And so when the baby started to come up, I was ready to take the shot because I had practiced taking shots on, with my fin. So I had my fin stretched out all the way, and then I was focusing on my fin. So as the whale started to come up, it actually started to open its mouth around all of these bubbles, which was a very unique and rare behavior that isn't seen very often. At least that's my understanding. And from talking to different people, including some scientists, they're not really sure exactly what the whale was doing. It's either playing, right? It looks very happy, like it's playing. But it may also be something like, a behavior that is going to help them when they go back to Antarctica to start feeding. Because when they go back to Antarctica, they start feeding again, and they're feeding mainly on krill. And so they have to open up their mouths really wide, right, to do that bubble feeding. So we're not really sure if the whale was like practicing, some kind of like feeding behavior, or if it's playing or what it's doing. But the picture that you see on the right side of the screen is the picture that I took. And you have to admit that the whale like looks very happy, right? And then the picture on the left is the picture that Ron took of me taking that picture of the whale, which was really cool, because I think that, Ken, you can probably identify this with this, but as a photographer, you don't really get too many pictures of yourself, right?
You do not.
You mainly get the pictures that you take of the fish or the animal or whatever it is, or you take of other people. So it was really cool that we were side by side, and, I got some pictures of him and he got some pictures of me, and so forth. So this picture actually won the Big Picture and Natural World Photography competition. So that was really rewarding as well.
See, and I thought you just told the whale a really good joke, and he's going, ho, ho, ho.
Yeah, it's a very happy looking whale. And I've actually, I had somebody once put in a microphone and send the picture back to me.
Perfect.
Yeah, because it looks like, the whale would be like singing.
And he's singing,
that was a good one too. Yeah.
That's an old Larson joke.
Okay. Okay, so here we have Raja Ampat. Raja Ampat is just a very, very beautiful place, way remote eastern part of Indonesia. And I've only been there once. I went there in 2018 with Ocean Geographic as part of the Elysium Heart of the Coral Triangle expedition. And the goal of the expedition was, of course, to photograph the reefs, but to also do some research on the diversity of the fish life, the state of the corals in terms of bleaching, and then to also look at microplastic assessments. So during this trip, I was able to get this photograph, and this is actually a vertical. So I think one of the hardest things for a lot of photographers is to get out of taking landscape pictures, right? So, taking horizontal pictures, to actually turn the camera and take a vertical. Magazines especially like to have verticals. And I find that for every 10 landscape pictures of mine, I've got like one corresponding vertical. So I myself am guilty of not taking more verticals. On this particular dive, this was at the very beginning of the dive where I went down and everything around me looked like this. I mean, it was just gorgeous, just vibrant, soft corals, super colorful, lots of fish life. It was kind of like, which way do I even point the camera and take a picture, because it's all so beautiful. So this is what I call a flyby shot, because I took 2 frames of this coral head, and then, there was a little bit of a current. So I just kept going with the current. And after the dive, when I looked at my pictures on the computer, I was like, oh man, I should have stayed at that place at the beginning and taken more pictures, because it was so beautiful. So this picture ended up on the cover of a couple different magazines, which was really nice. And again, it really showcases, the beauty and the healthiness of the coral reefs. And it's a great tool to promote ocean conservation, because, this is what a healthy reef should look like. And by showing, non-divers and people who aren't really familiar with that kind of stuff, how beautiful the ocean can be if we protect it, it can really help to promote that conservation.
Renee, can you sit on that for 1 second? Can you go back?
Yeah.
Just a point to make, and when we get to Q&A, Andrea is going to ask a post-processing question, but I want you guys to take a look at, that's the same shot on each cover. And just take a look at the one on the left versus the one on the right. It says nothing to do with the way she shot it. This is the way they processed it when they decided to print it. And look at, for instance, look at that orange coral right in the middle of the shot. Compare the two. It looks a little bit more orange on the right. You lose a little detail in the fish on the right. So just when you get to asking about post-processing, it does indeed make a difference. And that's a great example of it right there.
Absolutely. Yeah, the picture on the left has a lot more red.
Yeah.
And the picture on the right has a lot more orange. And I think they were trying to match the orange border on the magazine, to be honest.
I was going to say, if it was National Geographic, that fish would have been yellow. Match that exactly. Match that yellow border. Anyhow.
Oh, that's a really good point. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. All right, so after that first wreck experience, I had another opportunity to shoot another shipwreck. This is a really, really interesting shipwreck. So first of all, it's in an area that most people haven't heard of. It's called Neom, and Neom is basically on the northwestern tip of Saudi Arabia, bordering Jordan, and just across from Sharm el-Sheikh, essentially from Egypt. And this area of the Red Sea is very beautiful. It hasn't, been open to divers until very recently, basically 2019, and then we had COVID. But it's a very beautiful place because it hasn't been explored, by people. The area is very underdeveloped. And this shipwreck, which is called the Georgios Wreck, it basically hit the coral reef in 1978. It was a cargo ship. It was carrying a large load of flour. And when it hit the reef, the captain tried to restart the engine, which actually caused a fire. And then the ship burned for several days. And that's why it now has this very, prominent rust color. And the ship is just massive. So looking at this picture, you can only see half of the ship. This is actually midship here. And this is the bow of the ship, which of course is coming, above the surface. But the stern of the ship, which you cannot see, which is way back here, goes down to 80 to 90 feet below the surface. So it's actually just a massive shipwreck. And so when I went to this location, I was actually brought there with a team of photographers as part of a paid assignment. And the shipwreck was actually something that I knew I was going to photograph ahead of time because I was sent pictures of it, like kind of aerial shots. And so I said, okay, I am not going with a fisheye. So I knew that with this shipwreck, especially with wanting to preserve the lines of the ship and to not distort anything, that I needed a wide angle lens, and I needed the widest rectilinear wide angle lens possible. So for the Canon, that's going to be the 11 to 24. So what I did was I shot with the 11 to 24, and it worked out really well. And as you can see, I didn't even get the whole ship in the frame with that suit. And I was shooting this at 11 millimeters. So this picture actually is interesting because we were at this location for the entire day. And so we were there, actually, it was just me and my husband and the boat captain. And the assignment was to actually shoot this ship above water and underwater from all different angles of the sun. And so from swimming around this ship for hours, I knew that when the sun was about to set, right, for the golden hour, it was going to hit this side or the bow of the ship. And I had also scouted the location and found a very shallow coral head that I knew I could light with my strobes. So the shot that I had in my mind that I was going to go for right before sunset was a vertical shot where the bow of the ship would be above the water with the sun striking, right, that part of the ship. And then the coral head underneath would be lit by my strobes. So I spent a lot of time there, okay? And on my way, as the sun was getting to the right position, I was swimming across, right, this mid part of the ship. And I looked down and I saw this huge school of fish. And I thought to myself, okay, well, that's kind of a good shot. I should try to take this shot first, just real quick. And so I fired off a few shots, probably 7 or 8. And I looked at my screen, and the one that I looked at was all cut off because the water was pretty wavy. And I looked at it and thought, oh, that's terrible. I'm just going to keep going. And so I went over to the bow of the ship and I stayed there for the rest of the evening until the sun set. And then when I looked at my computer, I was like, oh, there's actually a couple frames here that aren't bad. And I actually entered both this one and the vertical one into the Underwater Photographer of the Year contest. And this was the one that they chose. So you just never know, like, what judges will choose. And it wasn't the image that I thought was the best one. And I think it's because I had spent so much of my mental energy in the other shot that I just automatically thought that was the better one, but it wasn't what the judges thought. Okay. So moving on from shipwrecks to turtles here. So this is called Honu Sunburst. And I took this picture in Maui, actually, back in October of 2020. So in 2020, I actually lived on Hawaii for about a year with my family. And so during this time, I was able to dive just a lot more than I have ever dove in my life. You know, usually with living in Southern California, I'm diving here a couple times a year. And then the rest of the time, it's like a trip somewhere, maybe every 2 to 3 months for like a week or something, or a few days, or maybe in the summer, I go somewhere for 2 weeks or 3 weeks. But when I was living on Maui, I was diving, 3, 4, 5 times a week. And not only because, I was living in a place that had good diving, but because they have a lot of shore diving there. And the shore diving is very accessible because you can rent a tank for $7 and you can just go out and it's very cheap, and you can, have access to all kinds of sites that are right offshore that are very shallow and have lots of marine life. And for the first time in my life, I felt that I could dive and I could just not have so much pressure to take pictures, but to actually observe like the behavior in the animals. Especially because these dives were so shallow, like we're talking 20, 25 feet. I could last 90 minutes on a tank. And I felt like, okay, I can just kind of chill and watch these animals and wait for something cool to happen and then take a picture of that. So on this particular morning, this is in the morning, it was super early. This was before the hordes of divers come out to the site. It's actually called Malo Wharf. I was at the turtle cleaning station, and I noticed that these 3 turtles were kind of hanging out together, and they started to kind of come together almost like a circular formation. And so I basically knew that I had one shot because I was shooting into the sun and I had my strobes on full power. So what I did is I was very careful to not blow out any bubbles. And I basically kind of came up underneath and was shooting up towards the surface. And as the turtles filled the frame, I took that one shot when I got as close as I think I could possibly get. And then I actually had to duck down and, duck out of the way so that I didn't run into the turtles. And this shot was actually taken with a fisheye lens. Usually I choose the 16 to 35 wide angle rectilinear lens when I'm working with turtles because they're smaller. But what's kind of ironic is that the reason why I could fit all 3 of them into the frame is because I had the fisheye. And the reason why I had the fisheye was because the shore dive this particular day was, pretty much at low tide. And you have to walk out pretty far across rocks, and then you have to get back out. So the heavier your camera is, the harder it is to get in and out. And so with the fisheye, I can use the little dome and it's a lot lighter. And so it actually ended up working out for this shot. And I got really lucky with this composition because with living on Maui for that whole year and going back to the site many times, I never saw the same kind of composition or formation again. This was like a one-time thing. Okay, so moving on, this is called Skylight. And this is the image that won the Underwater Photographer of the Year for 2021. It was the overall winner. I took this on the island of Moorea, like I did with that Sharky Sunset picture I showed you in the beginning. The main thing here, though, is that I had already done a lot of those sunset split shots. And so I wanted to really try to do something that was different and what I thought was more unique. And so the shot that I kind of envisioned in my mind was to shoot the sunset through Snell's window. So Snell's window is where you can see when you're looking underwater up through the surface, and you can see up through the surface through like a cone of light. So this shot has to be done in very shallow water. And so this particular image was the result of going out, several nights in a row, kind of night after night after night, waiting for kind of the stars to align because, we needed to have a good sunset. We needed to have, the sharks around. They needed to be in a good composition. And then, I just got lucky, of course, with the birds. So this ended up, all working out. And this was entered into that contest along with the 3 turtles, and which is the shot that I showed you right before this one. And I actually thought, first of all, I had no idea that I was going to win this competition. I was really, really surprised, quite shocked, actually, to believe, to be honest. But I thought that out of all the images that I entered, because you can enter up to 20, I thought that my three turtles shot was my best picture and that it had the best chance of just winning something, like placing, not winning the whole thing. And so when I had heard that it was this picture and that I had won the whole thing, I was very, very surprised. But I was very honored, and it's been an amazing experience to have won that contest. And again, it's not something that I ever expected. Okay, so getting towards the end here. So this is the Ocean Photography Awards. It's actually a fairly new competition. The competition was just announced in September, so a couple months ago. And this is the second year of the competition. And the Ocean Photography Awards is in conjunction with Oceanographic magazine. And this year, they had a new category called the Female 50 Fathoms Award. And it's a nomination award that is essentially to recognize and to celebrate women in ocean photography, since it's primarily a male-dominated field. So I was nominated for the award, and then I had to fill out, some questions. I had to answer some questions on a form, and then I had to submit a portfolio of 10 images, and then they chose the winner. And out of the 10 images that I submitted, it was actually this was one of my 10 that actually grabbed the judge's attention, and also Blancpain. So the award is actually sponsored by Blancpain, which is, kind of like a high-end luxury watchmaker manufacturer. But Blancpain is actually the company that first manufactured the dive watch in 1953, because back then, of course, we didn't have computers. And in order for people to keep track of how long they were underwater, right, they needed to have a watch. So they've been making dive watches since 1953. And they've also been very involved with ocean, awareness and ocean conservation and ocean preservation. And they do support and sponsor a lot of photographers and various organizations that raise awareness for ocean conservation, which is really nice. So they sponsored the award. And then this is the watch that I won. And they actually chose that picture, to kind of show in conjunction with the watch, which I thought was really cool. And then finally, I just wanted to end with this shot. So it's another one of my sunset split shots where you can see the stingray there. And like the shot that I showed you with the shark, the idea here is to expose for the sky, and then to be using your flash guns or your strobe, right, to light the stingray. And like the shark, the stingray is very close, and it's all being lit by the strobe light. And I think that another thing that really helps with, trying to connect your images to the viewer is eye contact. So you can see that the eye in the stingray is looking, directly at you. And I had multiple frames of, this image, and I have, over the years, lots of these images, but really makes one image stand out from another. Sometimes it's just something as simple as eye contact. So that's basically what I have for you guys. Sorry that went a little over the 45 minutes, but
you're fine.
It's hard to get it all in there.
It is, especially when I keep interrupting with the sides and stuff like that.
It's good.
Why don't you unshare the screen, that way everybody can see everybody a little larger. I'll just sort of go off of a comment Renee made about being a film shooter. I started off as a film shooter. Wow. And you're absolutely right about, you only had 36 shots, but I think there's an advantage. And I know a number of you in here, because I've known you for years, started as film, because when we shot film, basically every time you pulled the trigger, you were using up 3% of what you had. So you learned to frame the shot, and the shot you took would probably be the shot you want. So the thing I see people do digitally is blam, 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 blam. And it doesn't work that way. So anyhow, so Q&A time, you can either raise your hand like Jim is doing, or you can use in the reactions button at the bar. There's a little raise hand thing either way. But Jim, I'm going to have you go third because we had in the chat 2 other questions we'll get to first. So Andrea, you're up with your first question.
Okay. Renee, your photos are amazing, and thank you for sharing them.
Thank you.
That was a statement, not a question.
Yes, the question is coming, Ken. Be patient. I was wondering how much post-processing you wind up doing on your images.
Okay, yeah, that's a really good question. And it really varies from image to image. I will say that I only use Lightroom. I don't use Photoshop. And, for all of these contests that you enter, there's so many different rules. Like you can do this, but you can't do this. You can crop or you can't crop, or you can't do a radial filter, or you can't do any local adjustments. You can only do global. And so sometimes you're really, really limited. It depends what the purpose of the image is for. If you're sending it to a magazine and they want it like, a full page image, they're going to want more processing than like a wildlife, photography contest that wants a more natural image. So a lot of times it depends on the image, and it depends how good it is in camera. And then it also depends on what the purpose is. So it definitely varies. I find that, over the years, I have really tried to get the image as best as I can in camera so that I don't have to do as much processing. I find that when I'm working with those sunset images with the strobe power, that the white balance of those are always good. I don't have to do any adjustments. But when I take those images during the daytime, this is just one example, and I'm not, I have lots of ambient light and I'm working with that aqua water, I find that at least on my camera, which is a Canon, the white balance is always totally off. It's very green. It's not blue enough, and I have to adjust that, and then I have to adjust other things because then the sky becomes purple. So like I find that like it depends on what this. I don't want to say the settings, not the settings of the camera, but what the setting of the environment is and what you're shooting in, if that makes sense. And then it's something like a blackwater image, right? Like a macro blackwater image. Those don't need a lot of processing because the whole background is just black. You're just, lighting up that little tiny animal with your strobes. If anything, sometimes those images need to be, they need to be lifted a little bit, where sometimes they're a little bit dark because you don't have enough light on it, kind of thing. But again, just to kind of summarize, it really depends on like how well the image is in camera, and then what you're using it for, if it's like for a contest or is it for a magazine.
But the general rule of thumb, I think, Andrea, is the better you shoot it to begin with, the better off you are. If your thought is I'll save it in post, shoot it better the first time.
Yeah, and then the other thing that I should add as well, though, is that post-processing is not bad. In this day and age, especially if you're going to be using your images professionally and having them published, a certain amount of post-processing is actually required and necessary. You're not going to send a magazine, even if it's perfect in camera, you're not going to send them your raw file. So, you definitely have to do a certain amount of that.
Laura Belzer, you're up second.
Thank you so much. Oh my God, Renee, thank you. I feel so honored to be seeing your images and hearing all about your process. And thank you so much for sharing settings. And I would love to get an equipment list. You shared some of the lenses, which were really helpful. But yeah, for the underwater, like just a general, I shoot with a Canon 5D, which is really heavy.
Yeah, I do as well. I have the 5D3, I have the 5D4, and I have the R5, and I love those cameras, the 5D cameras. I love those cameras.
They make a beautiful image. So I had a question about. I'm sorry, Ken. I had a couple questions. I'm just going to put them all out there. One, are you using continuous shutter speed? And the other question is about the flash. How does the animal respond to the flash? And then because it's in a dark environment, where you focus, I know you're using a small aperture, so you get a big depth of field, but your focus is so tack sharp and it's pretty dark under there when you're, before the flash goes. So how are you handling focus? Are you using continuous shutter speed, and how does the animal respond to the flash?
Okay. So, when you say continuous shutter speed, do you mean like, am I shooting on manual or am I shooting on shutter priority? Is that what you mean?
No, continuous. So instead of like one shot at a time, it'll shoot off a bunch of images.
Oh, you mean a burst?
Burst.
Okay. Yeah. So I use back button focus, so that the main reason why, we'll get into the next part, but what you don't want to have happen with split shots is you want to be able to take, like, I shoot on low continuous, not high continuous mode. The reason why I don't use high continuous is, number one, my strobes aren't going to go that many times. I also don't want to go through that many images, it's just too much time. Yeah. So I shoot on low continuous, and the idea is to get like 2 to 3 shots kind of as a burst. And the reason for that is that the water line is moving. And so even when it's calm, you sometimes don't get the exact water line that you want. It can kind of cut something off or not be smooth or have bubbles in it or whatever. So I shoot on low continuous, and then, depending upon what the scene is, like if it's a coral reef and it's not moving, then even though I'm using back button focus because it's already programmed into my camera, I'll take like a picture and then I'll look at it, and then I'll take another picture, and then, I'll evaluate it. And so it's kind of more like what you're talking about with one picture and then, separately. If I'm taking something like a shark and I see that it's coming in, it's like, okay, I know I only have like a few frames where it's going to be like right in front of my camera. And so to try to get that right, I'll take 2 or 3 pictures. And the reason for that as well is that the strobes that I use, I can't get more than like 3 shots. And then the power of the strobe goes way down, even if I have the strobes turned down. So that's what I do for the shutter, if that answers that question.
And Renee, which strobes, DS1s?
I use the YS-D3s now, but I started with the D1s, then I had the D2s, now I have the D3s. I've actually got all 3 of them in my room over there. They all work. Have
your D2s flooded yet?
Not yet.
Little problem with it. Anyhow.
I've heard.
Yeah. They're seeing, I shoot with the D1s as well, the CNC strobes. And just to put in the plug for CNC, I think they're great strobes, because one thing you can do with them is you can really feather the exposure of the strobe. And that's a good way to adjust your shots. Anyhow, go ahead.
Yeah. So then in terms of the focus, I have the focus point underwater. So I move the little focus point to the bottom third of the area where you can move that thing around. And then the other thing you kind of have to think about is that with split shots, you're shooting at a narrow aperture, right? So you're shooting like f/16, f/18, f/20, f/22, whatever. So it's a very small aperture. So because you're shooting at that narrow aperture, it's going to be a lot more forgiving, and more of what's going to be in the scene is going to be in focus anyways. In terms of losing light, like let's say it's sunset, once the sun actually goes, I find that when the sun is still setting, my strobes are enough to get everything in focus. Once the sun has totally set and it's basically dark, right? And you're trying to shoot underwater, then my pictures start to look blurry. The flash isn't enough without, a focus light. In terms of the light scaring the animal, I don't use a focus light. The reason why is I tried using one once with a turtle and it scared it away. The flash, I find they don't respond to, and I think for the most part is because the water is absorbing so much of that light so quickly. I've actually turned the camera around and done a selfie at myself with the flash, and it doesn't really seem like much to me as well. And most of the studies that they do that investigate that question, like how does the flash affect the marine life, have been done on macro subjects, like things like seahorses. And these studies have concluded that, okay, it doesn't affect, the animal. What affects the animal more is when the, photographer's there and they're like putting their hand down and they're moving stuff around and disturbing the animal. It's not really the flash.
Thank you so much.
Oh, of course. Yeah. Thank you for the compliments and thank you for your interest and for your questions.
Jim, you're up.
Wonderful. Renee, your photos are stunning. a number of years ago, you and I took a class from Mark Strickland at Blue Water Photo. And I swear he spent way more time focusing on you and way less time on me. And if he'd only spent more time on me, you know, who knows what would have happened. But anyhow, that was funny. But two questions. Number one, how much of your success is due to hard work versus innate ability? And how much of your success is due to other professional photographers helping you?
Oh gosh, boy, that's a hard one. Well, I mean, I would like to think that I do have, you know, some vision or talent due to my artistic background, and I think that probably helps. But I will definitely say that I work very, very hard and very, very patient. That picture that I showed at the beginning with the sunset turtle, I took that back in 2017. And when I go on a trip, like, you know, to Hawaii, or when I was living there, you know, I'll go out night after night after night after night and not really get anything that, you know, is something that I'm going to be able to do with that, you know, with that picture that maybe I don't consider to be a very good picture. But I'm very patient where, like, you know, I will go back out and I'll try again and I'll try again. And so that's just kind of one example. But I think that, you know, in terms of like what I've learned from other photographers, what really helped me in the beginning is I did two things. One is that I bought Martin Edge's book, The Underwater Photographer. It's an excellent book. And at the time, I didn't know like what a shutter speed was or what an aperture was or anything. I didn't take any photography classes. I didn't know anything. And so I studied that book like absolutely like crazy. I actually took it with me on trips. It's kind of a thick book, you know, it takes up weight. I brought it with me. And then I started going to meetings with Blue Water, and Blue Water would have, you know, dive meetings at Blue Water Photo. They would have speakers, you know, every month. I would go to those every single time. And I, you know, was probably the only person sitting there with a notebook, and I would take notes on every single thing that somebody would say. Any tip that somebody would say, I would write it down. I would carry that notebook with me on every single trip. And so I found that those meetings were really, really helpful in terms of learning, you know, the technical side of the photography and then how to take the pictures. And then in terms of like actual people, you know, I think that the most progress I made was actually just, you know, applying what I had heard at these meetings and what I had read in the book, like in the water, to actually practicing it, you know, with the camera. But of course, you know, if you go on a dive trip and there's other photographers, you're going to speak to each other and, okay, how do you do this? And how do you do that? And, you know, all photographers can learn from each other. And we can all get tips from each other, whether you're, you know, really experienced or just starting out. It really helps to definitely talk with other photographers. And so I did a lot of that in the beginning, and definitely picked up tips, you know, along the way. And now I'm sharing those, you know, with other people, because it definitely helped me out. And, you know, nowadays I pretty much shoot by myself. You know, when I have a vision of something I want to go after in terms of a shot, I'm usually not in a group of 12 people swimming around. I'm usually like, you know, by myself or with my husband. And, you know, the goal of the trip is to not have a vacation and sit around the pool, but to get a certain shot. And maybe that's not for everybody because it's not exactly the definition of a relaxing vacation, but I'm very focused. And like I said, I work very hard. And I think that's one of the reasons why I've been able to be successful in terms of my photography. I don't know if that answers your question or not.
Yes, it does. Thank you so much. Can I ask one other quick question, Ken?
No, I mean, yes, of course, please.
So this is a completely dumb question, maybe because I've never shot split shots, only underwater shots, but are you literally holding the dome, or are you raising it up and down? Or are you just holding it right at the water line?
Yeah, so actually what I'm doing is I have, you know, the camera, right? I'm holding the camera, and the dome and the camera I have to lift out of water. So there's two types of split shots. One is where you're standing in a shallow lagoon. That's much easier because you don't have to, like, you know, muscle the camera up out of the water while you're bicycling, you know, and treading water in deep water, right? So you're able to really kind of hold that camera where you want it. The other type of split shot is in deep water, where you have to basically bicycle your legs and hold that camera up, which can be a little bit more difficult. But the camera, the dome port is essentially approximately half out of the water and half in the water. And not only does the dome port have to be, part way out and part way in, but in terms of angling that dome port, right, that becomes very important, because if you're angling too much this way, like up towards the sky, you're going to cut off the underwater portion of the image. And if you're angling too far down, you're not going to get anything above the water, and you're just going to get what's underneath, right? And that could actually be the intent, right? Where you're doing like a strictly underwater shot with a reflection with just a teeny sliver of what's above, then you would angle that more excessively. But that's what I was saying, is that's what you need to like just get in the water and start practicing it, because, somebody can tell you like, in one of these Zoom classes, okay, you need to do this, this, and this, right? Or you can read about it in an article, right? Or in a book. But until you actually get in the water and you actually experience it, then it's kind of like muscle memory, and you learn, okay, this is kind of where the camera needs to be, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Sure.
So we have a question from the chat, and I will intro it with a story because it leads right into the question. So I did a split shot thing for the Aquarium of the Pacific, and it was part of their ad campaign. What they wanted was in our little shark touch tanks, which are all 2 feet deep. So I'm in there, and we wanted 2 kids, petting the shark. So the shot we're trying to get is the kids above the water and the kids down. And what you'd hear from me every time I lost my balance or my elbow slipped or whatever is I need a dry diaper because I had to wipe off the top of the lens. So that leads into Kaz's question, which is, how do you get the water drops off the lens for the above water portion of the shot?
I'm actually surprised that wasn't the first question, because every time I do one of these talks, that's the first question I get is what to do about these water droplets. And, I will tell you that no matter what you do, you're still going to have to deal with those water droplets. So every tip that I'm going to give you guys is to minimize them. It doesn't completely get rid of them. So the first thing is that the glass dome is going to be much better than the acrylic dome. And the glass dome is going to shed the water droplets much more easily. The other thing that's very helpful is a mass defogger like Sea Drops. I prefer Sea Drops over Sea Gold because it's easier to kind of spread around the dome, and it creates a film so that when you dunk the camera in the water and you bring it back out, that you're not attracting a bunch of water droplets. The problem is that it's temporary. It doesn't last very long. Some people will resort to spit. They'll actually spit on the dome or lick the dome and use that, which does work, but it's also very temporary, and it doesn't work as long as the Sea Drops. The other thing that I have found out through trial and error, and was speaking to Blue Water and Nauticam and so forth, is that even if you have a glass dome, if you don't keep that dome meticulously clean, it's going to also start attracting water droplets. The reason why is you rinse that dome with fresh water. And the last thing that you want to do is just have those water droplets, even if they're fresh water, dry on the dome, because that will essentially make deposits on the dome, like mineral deposits, and then that will attract the water droplets. The worst thing that you can do is to put a wet neoprene cover on your dome and let it sit there and dry. Definitely don't want to do that. So even if you have a glass dome, if you don't take care of it, and you let the fresh water, dry on there, or you put that wet neoprene cover on there, you're going to end up with the same problem that you have with the acrylic dome, where it's attracting all kinds of water droplets. So it's kind of a pain in the butt. I've heard Alex Mustard uses a potato. I've actually never tried the potato. I find that the clean, newer dome and the Sea Drops kind of works enough for me that it's not so much of a problem.
And I will say, if you've already got water spots on your lens or your dome, and you probably do, and one good way to find it, if you take just a small flashlight, like something like that, shine it right across the dome, you can see stuff that you wouldn't see normally. But there are products, and believe it or not, sometimes at auto stores, that are water spot removal type things. And I've got one thing, I don't remember what it is, I've got it in the back room, but there are some of these products that are actually pretty good about cleaning up even acrylic or anything like that, and they should work on the glass as well. So yeah, spots are very hard, very hard. That's why there's that little spot correction tool in Lightroom.
Yes, and that is actually very helpful. The only problem is that you can end up with spots on the eye, and then you can't rescue that. And
yes,
then
you can.
there's also
Then you put an eye patch over the fish, and you call it a pirate fish. All right, no. Any other questions? Alf, were you raising your hand there a second ago, or was that just you were just sort of shifting in your chair? Probably just shifting. All right. Well, if we've gotten all the questions, we've taught you everything we can possibly teach you. I will expect images from all of you in my box within the next week or so. And Renee and I will get back to you to let you know if you should continue on your photography efforts or if you should flood your camera by opening it underwater. Well, I'm only kidding. Although I will tell you one final story. There was one time we were at Unexo in the Bahamas, and we really did flood a camera. It was back in the old Niconas days. And we were doing a dive with the Photo Pro, and he didn't know we had flooded the camera. It was one of our cameras. And we decided that we'd really get with him. So we took the flooded camera and we wrote in big letters on it, rental, like they had on theirs, and swam up to him underwater like we had a problem. And then we just pulled the lens off the camera and watched his horrified look. Anyhow. The good old days of film.
Yeah, he's always the Joker, Ken.
Always.
Always.
Renee, thank you very much. Everybody, since you're muted, you can give the traditional Zoom Seekers round of applause. We will, two things. We will continue the photo theme actually next month. Laura, did you have another question or no? Okay, that's okay. That's okay. I see that. Oh, that's applause hand. I thought maybe raised hand. We will continue photo theme next month. Doug Slosh and Lorenza Slosh, who used to be on the Palau Aggressor. They now live in Colorado. Doug's a great photographer. And I found out, by the way, has a twin brother who I didn't know until I walked up to the guy and couldn't realize why he didn't know who I was. He said, "Oh, you must be a friend of Doug's." But they will be our speakers next month. And to let you know, I've been pleased overall this year with the attendance we've gotten. So I've committed, at least in my head, to doing Zoom Seekers through next year as well. And I've started assembling the speaker list for next year. So hopefully I'll have all that for you around December 1st. So that's sort of the plan. So once again, Renee, thank you very much for spending this lovely time with us. And
thank you,
we will look forward to seeing more of those split images in the future. So for now, I get to do what is, I won't say it's my favorite part, but I get to go down here and find not only the end button, but now I'm about to click end meeting for all. So everybody wave goodbye. Hope to see you next month. Again, Renee, thank you. I will send you a quick note, and thank you all for watching Zoom Seekers this time. We'll see you soon.